Okay, hello class, good morning. So welcome to our continuation of the discussion for chapter number 9, and this is the part 2, and this is also the final video discussion that we will have in this subject. Okay, so congratulations if you've reached this level. Now let us start. So we ended last time with the exotoxins. Okay? So exotoxins. Let's continue with the exotoxins. Okay. Your exotoxins are also classified based on structure and function. Okay? So meron siyang tatlong classifications. And the first one is your A, B toxins, or you can also call them as type 3 toxins. Okay? Now, actually, most of your exotoxins class, most of them are classified as AB toxins. So, karamihan sa mga exotoxin ninyo, sila? Type 3 toxins. Okay? When you say type 3 toxins, so these are the largest group of exotoxins and they have two parts, your A and B. Okay? So, ang AB toxins natin class, they are actually the first toxins to be studied intensively. So, sila yung pinakaunang na-study ng ating mga researchers. Okay? And they are composed of two parts. The first one is your A, you can call it as active enzyme component, and the second one is the B part, which is the binding component. So meaning the B is the part which binds to the host cell, and then the A is the part that causes damage to the host cell. So yan B component binds to a receptor on the host cell, okay, on the surface of the host cell, and both parts are transported into the cell, and the two parts separate after when they are already inside your host cell, and at that time your part A or the A or the they call this or the active enzyme component will separate and will cause damage. So how will the active enzyme component do the damage? Okay, this is through inhibiting protein synthesis ng mga host cell. So pinipigilan ng part A natin na mag-produce ng protein yung mga host cell, and thereby killing your host cell in the process. So ito yung sample niya. Okay, this larger one is the A component and the smaller one is the B component. Ito yung receptor sa host cell natin. So your binding component will attach to the to the receptor on the surface of the host cell, and after that, so they will be able to enter. Okay, kaya nga binding component siya because it helps your toxin enter the host cell. Kapag nakapasok na sila, 'di ba? So hihiwalay yung A component niya or the active enzyme component, and thereby will cause damage and kill your host cell through inhibiting protein synthesis of the host cell. Okay? So yan ang AB toxins natin. May dalawang parts. Next. So let's go with the second type of exotoxin, which is the membrane disrupting toxins. You can also call this as type 2 toxins. Okay. So in here, in your type 2 toxins class, this disrupts the plasma membrane of your host cell and causes lysis or rupturing of the host cell, either by forming channels through the plasma membrane or disrupting the phospholipid component of the host cell membrane. So, itong sa membrane disrupting toxins, ang tina-target niya is the plasma membrane. So, it actually have two types. Number one, you have the leukocidins that are membrane disrupting toxins that kill phagocytic white blood cells. So, ano yung target nitong leukocidins? Coming from its name, leukocytes meaning white blood cells. Sinisira niya ang plasma membrane ng white blood cells through forming protein channels. Okay, so kapag napo-form na, when your leukocidins are present, it forms protein channels doon sa cell membrane ng inyong white blood cells and causing rupture, no? So actually, your leukocidins class, hindi lang white blood cells yung inaatake niya. It also attacks macrophages. So, diba, your leukocytes or white blood cells are the defense of the blood. On the other hand, macrophages, ito naman sila ang mga phagocytes present in the tissues. So, kapag phagocytes present in the blood, white blood cells yun. Kapag phagocytes present in the tissues, then meaning, ang tawag sa kanila is macrophages. Okay? So, inaatake rin sila na leukocidins. Okay? Next, we have the second type 2 toxin is your hemolysins, which attacks or they kill red blood cells. Okay? Coming from its, from its name. So, ang ginagawa niya, ganun din, same with your leukocidins, it also forms protein channels in the cell membrane of your red blood cells, causing rupture of your red blood cells. Okay? And then we will go to the third type of the exotoxin, which is super antigens, also known as type 1 toxins. Now, in your type 1 toxins, they are actually bacterial proteins. Okay? So, bacterial proteins sila. And, antigens that provoke a very intense immune response. Okay? By using the T cells. So, what are T cells, by the way? If you remember, na-discuss ito, diba, sa anatomy and physiology, your T cells is actually a type of a white blood cell. Okay? Isa siyang white blood cell that acts against foreign organisms or foreign tissues, such as your transplants. So, do you remember the transplantation of the skin? Okay? Or other tissues. So, ayan. Yan yung binabantayan ng ating T cells, okay? They act against foreign organisms and foreign tissues such as transplants. Now, the problem with your T cells class, okay, when they are stimulated by your type 1 toxins or super antigens, they release the enormous amounts of cytokines. Okay? Ang cytokines natin, these are protein hormones. Okay, so isa silang hormone, protein hormone, and the cytokines will actually stimulate or inhibit many normal cell functions. So, maraming naapektuhan na cell functions itong cytokines, and an increase in the concentration of your cytokine hormones class will cause fever, pwede ring nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, shock, and pwede ring death. Okay? So, hindi maganda para sa katawan ng isang host na tumaas the concentration of the cytokines will increase. It is not good. Okay? Because it will cause harmful effects on the host's body. So, yun yung inaatake ng super antigens. It stimulates your T cells to produce large amounts of your cytokines, which can harm instead of enhancing immune responses. So, imbis na nakakatulong yung cytokines, when it is present in a large concentration, nakakasama siya. Okay? So, one example of a super antigen toxin is your Staphylococcal Toxin. Okay, next. So, let us discuss the major examples of exotoxins. And we have number 1, your Diphtheria Toxin that is created by the Corynebacterium diphtheriae. Okay, so siya yung nagre-release ng Diphtheria Toxin. And, when the Corynebacterium produces toxin or Diphtheria Toxin, it is carrying a when it is carrying a lysogenic phage, which includes the toxins. So hindi lahat ng Corynebacterium class will produce your diphtheria toxin. It will only produce your diphtheria toxin if it is infected with the lysogenic phage. Again, if you remember, ano nga ang phage? Short for bacteriophages. These are viruses that injects their genetic material to bacteria para doon mag-replicate ang kanilang genetic material inside the bacterial cell. So, itong lysogenic phage natin, one example of a bacteriophage carrying the tox gene. So, if infected ang isang Corynebacterium nitong lysogenic phage, so, that is the time that it will produce the diphtheria toxin. Okay? So, your diphtheria toxin is actually a cytotoxin. So, meaning it affects what? Several or a variety of cells, okay, of the body, which inhibits, so it will inhibit your protein synthesis as follows. So, ito yung first step niya. Okay, ito pala example. This is an example of your phage class. So, it will inject the toxin gene or the tox gene in your Corynebacterium, causing the Corynebacterium to release the diphtheria toxin. So, how? Okay, the toxin, your diphtheria toxin is a type of, it is consisting of two different polypeptides combined. So, A and B rin siya. The A is the active enzyme and the B is the binding component. Now, the A is the one which actually causes the harm to the host, but it cannot act without the B also being present. So, syempre, hindi maapektuhan ng active enzyme ang inyong host cell if hindi siya nakakapasok inside the host cell, correct? So, paano siya makakapasok? Through the help of the binding component or the part B. That's why these two needs each other. If kulang ng isa, then the diphtheria toxin is not complete. Second step, polypeptide B binds to the surface receptors on the host cell and cause transport of both parts across the plasma membrane into the cell. So, this is the whole process of your diphtheria toxin action, no? So, ito yung number 1. Ayan, no? The bacterium produces and releases the toxin. Ito ang toxin natin, class. The circle and the arrow structure. Ang circle is yung A or the active part and the arrow is the binding component. So, the bacterium releases that and dito na tayo sa step 2. So, the B component or the binding component of your exotoxin binds to the host cell receptor and exotoxin enters the cell. So, ayan, pumasok na sila, diba? After that, in step 3, the two parts will separate. So, maghihiwalay ang circle and ang arrow. And then, when the active component separates from the B or binding component, it will inhibit protein synthesis inside the host cell. Okay? So, protein synthesis is very important, especially sa mga cells ng host. Okay? So, that is a major type of chemical reaction that is happening inside your cell or host cell. So, when we are disrupting the production of your proteins, maraming enzyme ang hindi na-produce, hindi mangyayari ang mga chemical reaction, and later on, your host cell will die. So, that is the action of your diphtheria toxin. Let's go to the second one, or the second major type of exotoxin, which is the Erythrogenic Toxin. Now, the one that produces this is your Streptococcus pyogenes bacteria, and they can carry a prophage which causes them to produce 3 types of cytotoxins, A, B, C, which are also called erythrogenic toxins because they damage capillaries under the skin and produce a red rash. Okay, so let's talk about first the prophage. So, what is a prophage? Your prophage is a genetic material that is produced by your bacteriophage. Ito yung genetic material na ini-inject ng bacteriophage doon sa bacterial cell. Okay? Ito yung genetic material carried by your bacteriophage. Now, kapag present ang prophage, your Streptococcus will produce 3 types of cytotoxin A, B, and C, or generally called as Erythrogenic Toxins. So, coming from its name, erythro meaning red, and then genic meaning producing, meaning ang erythrogenic, ang kanyang definition is producing red. Why? Kapag nagkaroon ka ng erythrogenic intoxication, you will be having red rashes all over your body. Okay? And this disease is called scarlet fever because of the red rash. So, ito yung example niya, scarlet fever. Now, if there is no presence of prophage class, your Streptococcus pyogenes will still produce strep throat, pero hindi siya magproduce ng scarlet fever. The scarlet fever will only be induced with the presence of your prophage. Okay? Next. You have your botulinum toxin. Okay, this is produced by your Clostridium botulinum, and this is a powerful neurotoxin. When you say neurotoxin, it affects your central nervous system or the nervous system. Okay? So, your botulinum toxin is ingested from food where the organisms have grown. So, if nakakain ka ng pagkain na merong botulinum toxin, you will have the disease. Now, your botulinum toxin actually prevents the transmission of nerve impulses from nerve to muscle by binding to the nerve cell and inhibiting the release of acetylcholine. So, since nervous system ang inaapektuhan niya, it affects the neurotransmitters. So, 'di ba? Kailangan, in order for the muscles to move, okay, you will need to pass the nerve impulses galing sa nerve papuntang muscle in order for the muscle to contract. If you still remember sa anatomy and physiology natin, 'di ba? So, para magkaroon ng muscle contraction, the nervous system will need to send a nerve impulse papuntang muscle in order for contraction to actually happen. And paano niya ginagawa yun? Through the release of your neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Okay? So, neurotransmitter natin yan. Anong ginagawa ng acetylcholine? It actually controls the contraction of muscles. Pwede rin siyang for dilation of your blood vessels. It also increases bodily secretions and slows down the heart rate. Okay? So, marami siyang muscle na kinokontrol. Okay? The presence of your acetylcholine will determine a lot of different types of muscle contraction. Na pwede siyang sa heart banda, pwede siyang sa ating muscles, no, in the body, hindi lang sa organs. So, kapag walang acetylcholine, walang magsisend ng message for the muscle contraction to occur. So, anong mangyayari sa muscles mo? Kapag walang muscle contraction, wala rin siyang tinatawag na muscle tone. Do you remember the muscle tone? Okay? So, kahit hindi tayo nagmo-move, our muscles maintain the muscle tone. So, if walang muscle tone, you will have a flaccid or limb paralysis. And this can be fatal, especially to infants. So, this is one example of an infant having a flaccid or limb paralysis. So, they are not able to raise their heads. They are not able to move. Okay? So, mahirap yan para sa mga infants natin. It is very hard for them to be, have an intoxication of botulinum toxin. Napakahirap. Yan, so flaccid, limp ka, paralysis because there is no presence of when you say flaccid or limb paralysis, there is a muscle tone lacking. You are lacking muscle tone. Okay? The organisms produce endospores which can survive some home canning methods. So, medyo talaga. Be careful with the canned foods you're buying. So, dapat doon tayo sa mga canned foods na certified safe siya. Okay? Ang production. Now, we also have the fourth type of major exotoxin, which is your tetanus toxin, also known as tetanospasmin. Okay? So, it is produced by your Clostridium tetani, and it is also classified as a neurotoxin. Also attacks or affects your nervous system. Now, kabaliktaran nung sa botulinum toxin natin, your tetanus toxin causes, characteristic convulsions known as tetanic spasm. So, hindi siya limp. When you say spasm or tetanic spasm, this is characterized by stiffness of your jaw muscle. So, naninigas yung jaw. Or, simply call it as lockjaw. Yan na yun siya. Okay? And then, it is also characterized by involuntary muscle cramps and contractions in your hands and feet. Ayan hands and feet, nagkakaroon ng involuntary muscle contraction. So, hindi siya limp, kabaliktaran ng being limp. And the contraction can also extend throughout the body. Now, so, kapag nagkaroon ng contraction throughout the body parts, pwedeng maapektuhan ang breathing ng isang tao. Especially if the respiratory system is, affected. Okay? So, you can get this through, deep punctured wounds kapag natuso ka ng bakal, for example. Okay. Another major exotoxin is your Vibrio Enterotoxin, produced by your Vibrio cholerae, and your Cholera Toxin is actually enterotoxin, so meaning it attacks the digestive system. Okay? So, it is also composed of 2 polypeptides. Ganun rin, the same with your Diphtheria Toxin. Meron din siyang part A and part B. Now, the B polypeptide binds to the cell lining of the small intestine. So, binding component pa rin yung B, pero they are binding with the cells of the small intestine. Now, the A component or the active component then induces the formation of cyclic AMP galing sa ATP natin in the cytoplasm. And the presence of your cyclic AMP causes the lining cells to release large quantities of fluids and electrolytes into the intestine, along with muscle contractions that contributes to severe diarrhea and vomiting. So, ito yung unique characteristic of unique effect of your Vibrio Enterotoxin. It causes severe diarrhea and vomiting. So, without treatment, your cholera can be fatal in a matter of hours. You can actually die, after several hours. Some strains of your E. coli also produce toxin called labile enterotoxin that has a similar action but not so extreme. So, kaya siya tinatawag, nagpo-produce din actually ang E. coli ng parang same na toxin with your Vibrio Enterotoxin, but it is not that extreme. Why? Because coming from its name, labile enterotoxin, it is actually sensitive to increase in temperature. So, the enterotoxin that is produced by your E. coli is not resistant to heat. Okay? So, it is more sensitive to heat than most other toxins. So, mas matindi pa rin yung Vibrio Enterotoxin. Okay? Next. Okay, the last example of a major exotoxin is your Staphylococcal Enterotoxin. So, the same pa rin, it attacks the digestive system. your Staphylococcus aureus is the one producing your Staphylococcal Enterotoxin that also affects the intestines in a way similar to the Cholera Toxin and causes a form of food poisoning. So, hindi diarrhea yung sa kanya. May kasama ng food poisoning. So, some strains of your Staphylococcus aureus produce a similar toxin that causes toxic shock syndrome. When you say toxic shock syndrome, it is characterized by high fever, accompanied by vomiting, pwede ring diarrhea, and it also causes also causes low blood pressure and meron ding occurrence of rashes resembling sunburn parang sunburn yung appearance ng rashes na napo-form dito sa Staphylococcal Enterotoxin. Okay? Okay, so contradicting to what I said on the first video, meron pala tayo nasali pala siya sa sa course pack. So, ayan, meron ding endotoxins. Okay, this is another type of toxin that is produced by your microorganisms. So, your endotoxins are a part of the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria, meaning your endotoxins are only produced by gram-negative bacteria. Okay? So, this is a membrane outside the peptidoglycan layer and consists of lipoproteins, meaning lipids plus proteins, phospholipids, lipids plus phosphate, and lipopolysaccharides or lipids plus your carbohydrates. So, sila combination ng lipid and carbohydrate. So, the lipid portion of your lipopolysaccharide called lipid A is the endotoxin. So, ito siya. Nakikita nyo ba? So, your endotoxins are found outside the surface of your gram-negative bacteria. So, these are your liposaccharides containing the lipid A, which is the endotoxin. Now, endotoxins, so they are lipopolysaccharides instead of protein. So, wala silang protein component. They are composed of lipids and carbohydrates. Now, they produce their effects after the gram-negative bacteria die and their cell walls undergo lysis. So, if buhay pa, if your bacteria is still living, the endotoxins will not be released. Marirelease lang sila kapag nag-undergo na ng rupture or lysis yung plasma membrane ng inyong gram-negative bacteria. Okay? Some antibiotics used against gram-negative bacteria cause lysis of the cell wall and may temporarily make symptoms worse. So, kasi yung ibang antibiotics natin, ang effect nila, the way they kill the bacteria is by rupturing their cell wall. Now, if nataon na yung bacteria is containing endotoxins, kapag na-rupture siya ng antibiotics, nare-release instead yung endotoxin. So, it causes worse symptoms. Napapa-worse niya yung situation. Okay. Now, have here. Okay, all endotoxins produce about the same signs and symptoms, although this may be more severe with some organisms than with others. They include chills, fever, your weakness, aching, and in extreme cases, shock and even death. They do this by stimulating macrophages. Again, macrophages, phagocytes found in your tissues. They stimulate macrophages to release excess amounts of cytokines, diba? So, diba kapag mas mataas na level ng cytokine ang present, mas dangerous siya for the host. And your endotoxins they contribute to miscarriages, okay? Now, endotoxins can activate blood clotting proteins, causing the formation of many small blood clots that blocks your capillaries. Okay? So, Ang endotoxins ninyo, mas pinaparami nila yung they stimulate overproduction of blood clotting. Na sa sobrang dami, it actually blocks the capillaries. 'Di ba? Your capillaries are the smallest types of blood vessels. So wala nang magsisend ng oxygen and nutrients doon sa tissues ninyo. And if that happens, your tissues are deprived from blood supply and they will eventually die. This is called disseminated intravascular clotting or DIC. So ito siya This will happen. In severe infections, magkakaroon ng inflammation and magkakaroon ng systemic thrombosis. So, mabablock yung ating mga capillaries. And then after that, if wala ng blood na nagfo-flow doon sa inyong tissues, the tissues will undergo DIC development and will later on die. Okay? So, ito yung healthy na lungs. Ito yung lungs na hindi na naka-receive ng blood. So, yan ang DIC. Okay. Your fever is, let's go with the occurrence of your fever. Paano ba nag-occur ang isang fever? Number 1, the first step, your gram-negative bacteria are phagocytized, meaning kinain sila ng phagocytic cells. Okay? As they are broken down inside the phagocytic cell, the lipopolysaccharides of the outer membrane are released. Since na-digest na sila inside the phagocytic cell, na-release na yung ating lipopolysaccharide. So, na-release na yung endotoxin. This causes your macrophages to produce interleukin-1. Okay? In short, IL-1. Okay? Now, when your interleukin-1 is carried to the hypothalamus of the brain, where the temperature control mechanism for the body is located. So, yung interleukin-1 ninyo, it will be sent to the hypothalamus. Ang hypothalamus ang nagko-control ng body temperature. Okay? So, when the IL-1 is present, it causes hypothalamus to release prostaglandin. Okay? So, ang nangyayari dyan, ang interleukin-1 ninyo, it stimulates the release of prostaglandins which reset the body's thermostat to a higher temperature. And so, we begin the fever. Kaya, when you are having a fever, tumataas ang body temperature mo. And that is caused by the presence of your prostaglandins released by the hypothalamus. So, sino ang head niyan? The presence of the interleukin. Okay? Your interleukin class, it is formerly known as endogenous pyrogen. Okay? Endogenous pyrogen. Kaya nga, ang tawag natin sa fever, you can also call fever as pyrogenic response. Pyro meaning fire. Genic, producing. Producing fire meaning, in short, it increases the temperature of the body. Okay, please remember, fever is also known as pyrogenic response, and your interleukin can also be called as endogenous pyrogen. Okay, causing an increase in the temperature of the body. So, you can use aspirin, Tylenol, etc. to inhibit the release of prostaglandins, which reduces your fever. Next, okay. The shock in general is a severe drop in blood pressure. So, pwede ka rin magkaroon, kung kanina fever, ngayon naman shock. Okay? Ang shock natin characterized by a decrease in blood pressure. Now, the shock caused by gram-negative bacteria is called septic shock or endotoxic shock. Okay? Now, it is also related to a substance produced by your macrophages. Following phagocytosis and lysis of the gram-negative bacteria, the phagocytic cell secretes the polypeptide called tumor necrosis factor or TNF, also called as cachectin. Okay? Now, this substance binds to many body tissues and alters their metabolism. So, this is how your septic shock occurs, class, ha? Ayan, kapag nag-rupture ang negative bacteria, nagproproduce ang phagocytic cells ng isang polypeptide known as TNF or cachectin. Now, itong substance na ito, they will bind with your body tissues and will alter their metabolism. This is how they affect your host cells. Okay? Binabago nila ang metabolism ng cell. And one effect of the changing of the metabolism of your host cell is it damages the capillaries that increases their permeability and causes them to leak fluid, thus lowering your blood pressure and leading to shock. So, kapag bumaba ang blood pressure mo, you can experience shock. Now, the lowered blood pressure is also harmful to your kidneys, lungs, and digestive tract. Okay, certain bacteria such as your Haemophilus influenzae, type B in the cerebrospinal fluid cause the release of your interleukin-1 and TNF, which weaken the protective blood-brain barrier. Do you remember the blood-brain barrier? So, di ba, ang blood-brain barrier natin ang it filters the bloodstream para yung blood na papasok sa central nervous system is sure na safe from microbes or wala siyang contamination or toxins na kasama. Now, what happens with your Haemophilus influenzae is it makes interleukin-1 and TNF present. And kapag nagsama yung dalawa na yan, it will weaken your blood-brain barrier. And if hindi na nafi-filter ng mabuti yung blood-brain barrier, yung blood na pumapasok sa brain, the many bacteria will enter your central nervous system. Okay? So, hindi na na-filter yung mga toxins na nanggaling sa blood that is entering your brain. Now, septic shock is very dangerous. Up to 50% of cases may be fatal. Actually, in the US class, 500,000 cases ng septic shock ang nangyayari each year. Okay? And 1/3 doon sa mga patients na yon, they can die within 1 month, and then half of them also die within 6 months. Ganyan siya kadelikado. We can produce antibodies against endotoxins, but they do not protect us against the effects and seem to even enhance the effects in some cases. So, medyo dehado tayo when it comes to antibodies against endotoxins. Okay, these are the organisms that produce your endotoxins. Number 1, Salmonella typhi, which causes typhoid fever. Number 2, your Proteus, that is a frequent cause in urinary tract infections, and Neisseria meningitidis, which causes meningococcal meningitis. Okay? Now, if bacteria have grown and produced endotoxins in material that is later sterilized, nabubuhay pa rin siya. Kahit na sterilize mo yung isang material, active pa rin, potent pa rin yung naiwan doon na endotoxin. Kahit napatay na, wala nang living bacteria. Okay? So, it will still remain on the material, yung endotoxin natin. So, one way to test if a material is, fully sterilized, you can use the test Limulus amoxiboside lysate or LAL. Okay, you can use this to detect even traces of endotoxin. So, para hindi, if ever contaminated siya ng endotoxin, you cannot use it. But, this is parang masyado siyang complex for ordinary people. So, this is just done inside the laboratory or inside hospitals. Okay? I think that's it. So, thank you for watching the second part of our discussion video. Please study well and prepare well for your exam. Goodbye class, this is the final goodbye. I hope na makaproceed kayo no to second year without any problem. Okay, so thank you for watching. Goodbye.